I'm disgusted. I don't care if you can hit 35 home runs, but if you can't bunt, I mean, that's like not being able to use a spoon. I mean,
Yeah.
it's so basic. It's so basic. And the fact that they had to ban the shift, which I hated, don't get me wrong, I hated the shift anyway,
Right.
because you should have been hitting the ball the other way all day to every day. Well, we can't hit the ball because people throw so hard. No, bunt. And they'll stop throwing. When you start laying down some bunts, the pitcher's gonna have to change his windup to cover that bunt.
This is Again for the First Time with your host, Darren Redmond.
Hello, everybody. This is Darren Redmond from the Again for the First Time podcast and the PSF app. If you don't have it, subscribe now. It's absolutely free. Tell your friends. You know, there's many things in life that I don't like, but there's a lot more things in life that I do love. And one, I've played college football, coached college football, love hockey. But there is something just that is in my DNA about baseball. And I am here talking with Jonathan A. Fink. You know him from some of the other stuff that he's done, and we'll get into that. I want to talk about so many things with you, the Republic Baseball League and all of that that's going on, and the baseball gods and everything else. I want to talk about being a parent and of a child playing sports, on and on. Can you smell it? It's like hockey has made the turn. Right, we're getting into the time that these games really start to matter. We got the outdoor series. You have the national championship game in NCAA coming up. We have football playoffs about to start, and we have baseball. And Jonathan A. Fink is my guest. How you doing today, sir?
I'm doing great, Darren. Thanks for having me on the show.
Thank you so much. Thank you. So I want to start at the beginning, and I came across you, and I'm a baseball fanatic, football fanatic. I love to read, but through the Republic Baseball League. Tell me about it. Let's talk about it.
Well, I had published 8 nonfiction books, and I was talking to my wife one day, and she was joking to me because I was giving credit to the baseball gods for helping me write all these books. And she said, "Oh, come on. It's not like the baseball gods helped write a fictional novel."
Yeah.
Well, challenge accepted. About 2 weeks later, I'm on a walk with my dogs, and then the idea, like a bolt of lightning, came to me, and the idea of Kevin Dempsey came to me. And essentially, Kevin Dempsey is a college professor.
That's what I want to ask you. Who is Kevin Dempsey?
Yeah, he's a college
that's one of my questions.
Who is obsessed with baseball, just like I am. And so in many ways, I kind of channel myself through Kevin. And essentially, Kevin has to find a way to teach concepts like economics and political economy that are maybe not always interesting to college kids, but he finds a way of making those topics interesting by using baseball as his metaphor. And then from that, the PhD thesis comes into view. And essentially, the book is a story about how Kevin teaches his class and goes on his quest to earn his PhD in economics using the game and the business of baseball.
Yeah, it's so interesting you say that. I literally have chills because, as you know, or you may know, I'm a teacher. I'm a special education teacher, and I have my master's in education. And I've said for years, and I did a podcast that's already in the can, as the kids say, that'll be published soon about math. And one thing that used to really irk me is, and still does from time to time, is you talk to a young athlete, and she or he, they come up to you and say, "I'm terrible at math. I hate math." No, you're actually very good at math. Because I've seen you catch a fly ball. I've seen you and you swing and make contact. You're talking about velocity. You're talking about propulsion. You're talking about all these things. You don't realize that this is what you're doing, that you're actually living math in such a great way. And you tell it to kids, and their eyes get all big, like Marty Feldman. I'm going to show my age, Marty Feldman. And you're just like, my gosh, you're right. And and I try to do that when I teach, apply it to real day use in sports, very simple. And people would say, "Well, Darren, I'm not that quick, or I'm not that," and I'd say, "I wasn't that quick either. That's why I played the line." There's a difference between fast and quick. So I like this Dempsey guy. That is it. So without giving too much away, does he get a lot of pushback from his peers?
Well, he does. Kevin Dempsey, his biggest pushback is from the dean of the school. He's Dean McGregor's an old, stodgy, old school kind of guy, and he doesn't like change. He likes things set in his ways. And so Dempsey is kind of a radical in his teaching methods, and it takes time for Dean McGregor to warm up to Kevin, but eventually he does. And I've already written volume 2, and I'm working on volume 3, and their relationship changes over time as Kevin has more success, first with his thesis, but then the success with his students, and how much they're learning and how much they love what he's delivering to them. And he's making things like poli-sci and economics tangible and real and understandable. And it's a Trojan horse, because really we're talking about capitalism and democracy, meritocracy, and all these important things. But maybe if it wasn't for baseball, the students would just glaze over, and they wouldn't really, they would just hear wah, 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 right? So Kevin is trying to find ways to connect with students.
Well, I think that's a wonderful thing, and because anything that can bring them in and have some interest. And what we quickly realize is that we are not in individual cylinders, silos, that there is a connectivity to all of this, and the way that it works. I've often said to people who study or whatever, and they say, "Well, this isn't fair." Well, let's talk about what fairness is. The umpire is the final decision maker, safe or out. Well, they missed the call. Well, that's life. It sometimes happens, and then you try to get into the more esoteric conversation that says, well, if you left it up to the call of a referee, these things can happen. If you would have added to the lead in the 6th and the 7th inning, things would have happened. I like to jump all around. The other day I was watching a video of your son bunting, and are there people out there telling him that bunting is an old-fashioned thing? Because he did a beautiful bunt.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's interesting. I remember when I attended the parents' meeting for our Blue Valley North High School first meeting when my son was a freshman, and the coach was talking about, look, we're going to shift, and we're going to bunt, and we're going to bunt in every game, and we're going to shift in every game. And then when the season actually starts, and the bullets start flying, a lot of those great ideas seem to go out the window, and coaches kind of go back to what they've always done. You've seen a trend in baseball over the last 5, 10, 15 years, ever since Billy Beane and sabermetrics. You never saw exit velocity displayed at a game like you do now.
It's hard.
The industry is changing. Max Muncy can now bat 220, but if he hits 30 home runs and knocks in 80 RBIs, that's considered a good season, where batting 300 used to be considered the gold standard of what a good season was, right? So things like bunting, I think are very, very important still, but I'm an old school dad. But I would have to tell you that in modern baseball, on the travel ball circuit, you see very little bunting. You do not see it taught very often at the baseball academies and the travel clubs. And I think most kids, they watch Acuna Jr., hitting a home run and doing a little dance, and they all want to be hitting dingers. However, what I find is as a dad, and as an advocate for your son who's a ball player, my son's a middle infielder. He's 5'8", 160 pounds. He's not 6'2", 165 like some of these kids are who can hit dingers. And also, the velocity of the pitches get more sophisticated. The fastballs are no longer 75. Now they're 89, they're 90. You're seeing sliders and nasty curveballs. And so when my son goes to Lake Point in Atlanta and plays against the top kids in the country, you can get easily overpowered by some of these kids who are just huge and overly built and overpowering. And so what I found is that when you watch a kid struggling over overpowering pitchers, how do you strategize and counteract that? And my son's a speed guy, and if you can just get your bat out there and bunt, you're going to disrupt the pitcher's momentum. You're going to get a guy on base. You're going to then steal a base, pass ball. You go to third. Next thing you know, a bunt can turn into a home run. So I don't see a lot of bunting anymore at the at the college level and or at the high school level, and it's definitely not being taught that much. But in my opinion, I think that it's very, very important, especially for the little guys, the guys who are, the Jeff Fries of the world, right? I mean, who are not hitting dingers. And when you're a utility guy, you want to have an impact on a game in any way you can. It might not always be hitting 3 or 4 doubles in a game. It might be a couple of bunts, or a walk or two, a stolen base, and a couple good plays in the field, and you've had a really big impact on a game, but you might not have even had a ball to the gap. So I think that bunting is still very, very important. And maybe it's going to come full circle, because as these kids are getting bigger and stronger, right? It's becoming harder and harder to catch up to that velocity. And I think for the guys who can't, whose exit velocity is not 100, they're going to have a hard time catching up to a 90-mile-an-hour fastball. And therefore, I think things like bunting are going to become very, very important again. And maybe the pendulum will swing. And just like Phil Rizzuto, he was known as the best bunter of all time. He built a career on bunting. He became an MVP because of bunting, right?
Absolutely.
And so back then, bunting was really respected and appreciated. And a bunt was a base hit, just like a line drive. I think sabermetrics has changed that, unfortunately. But I think the pendulum for sabermetrics is now swinging so much so. We just mentioned in your last interview that the shift was banned. Yep. Because players couldn't figure it out, which is so crazy. George Brett once said, if they shifted on me, I'd bat 400. Right?
100%. 100%.
So I think that my hope, I hope the bunt makes a comeback, because I think that old school baseball, the way that it was played in the olden days, still has merit. But I do understand the desire to hit dingers, and I understand how the game has changed. And look, I understand that a home run. It's an RBI and a run scored. So home runs are preferable to bunts, but I also recognize that if it's a team game and momentum and energy and rallies still matter, rallies have to have men on base. You have to have walks and bunts, and you have to manufacture runs. So the idea of small ball is sort of a dying breed, but just like most things, the pendulum will, like in politics, we go too far to the left, we then swing to the right. So right now we're way off on one deep end, but I think there's a good chance that it'll swing back, especially when some guys can come in and have success doing things differently. So I would love it if a guy came into the league and he led the league in hitting by bunting all the time. I think that'd be epic. And then the pitchers would have to adjust.
So Jonathan, explain to me, because maybe I forgot. Was it 7 or 8 World Series championships that Billy Beane brought to bear?
And I don't think he brought any. I mean, it's so interesting about Billy Beane, because he's still a legend in many ways. And I certainly respect him very much. But I respect him in many ways because of the impact he had on the game, for better or for worse, because one individual was able to start a whole new trend. And believe me, there are so many front offices now filled with NBA graduates from Ivy League schools who have jobs in baseball, and they wouldn't if it wasn't for Billy Beane, right?
I'm sorry. To me, no disrespect to Billy Beane, who I remember as a Met prospect, a long-time suffering Met fan. But you know what? Curt Flood changed the game.
Yes, amen to that.
Billy Beane exploited the game. I'm sorry, those people, because they're making the game better. I don't see it. Launch angle, exit velocity, who cares? You know what I cared about? I knew that Bert Campaneris, Freddie Patek, and I'm sorry to talk about all the, you know what, you needed them, they could hit the other way, they'll bunt the guy over, they played impeccable defense. I'm sorry, middle infielders, like your son, I mean, the Keystone Cops, man, shortstop, second baseman, you know what that was, and I'm disgusted. I don't care if you can hit 35 home runs. But if you can't bunt, I mean, that's like not being able to use a spoon. I mean, it's so basic. It's so basic. And the fact that they had to ban the shift, which I hated, don't get me wrong, I hated the shift anyway.
Right.
Because you should have been hitting the ball the other way all day to every day. Well, we can't hit the ball because people throw so hard. No, bunt. And they'll stop throwing. When you start laying down some bunts, the pitcher's going to have to change his windup to cover that bunt.
That's right. But, and the defense has to adjust. The corners come in, and there's so many things that happen when you have a guy on the team that could be a change maker. But by the way, back to your comment about Billy Beane, his impact and how he exploited it reverberates. My son, him and all of his friends are obsessed with the high school, state, and national rankings that are run by organizations like Perfect Game and PBR.
Mhm.
And it was interesting because, PBR, I mean, look, great organization, how they run, but at the end of the day, yes, they are scouting players. But when you're a player, the odds of you making a great play when the scout is looking at you is very rare. A lot of times you're just standing around waiting for that opportunity. So what these scouts have to do is they send you to a showcase or a combine, and all they're doing is measuring they're throwing you, lob BP, and they're measuring your launch angle and your exit velo, and they're measuring your speed from, throwing from shortstop. And so a lot of these rankings are based primarily on these raw, basically sabermetrics kind of statistics. And it's not based on the eye test. It's not because the scout saw you play and saw you turn double play. It's based on these raw numbers. And the truth is, just because you have a high exit velocity doesn't mean you can hit a curveball.
No, exactly right. I mean,
Right?
it's the
So I
truth.
think a lot of these stats are very skewed, and it actually benefits the kids that are bigger and stronger because they're the ones that are going to have a higher exit velocity. But, Phil Rizzuto probably never had an exit velocity over 100, but he was one of the greatest players of all time. So I feel like the industry now is emphasizing kids. It's all about lifting weights and getting stronger to have a higher exit velo, as opposed to like we just discussed. I mean, if a kid's able to bunt once a game, they're going to bat 300 their entire high school and college career. People don't think like that. They want to hit dingers because that's what looks good on Twitter, right? And so that's why with Kevin Dempsey, Kevin Dempsey has his own Twitter account. I have an RBL account as well for the league.
Yes, I have it.
Right. So RBL focuses more on baseball as a business, what's happening with player salaries and what's happening with teams coming and going, and what's happening with development of the league. Where Kevin Dempsey, by the way, shout out to Ted Lasso. When I found out that Ted Lasso, one of my favorite shows, that Ted Lasso he's got his own Twitter account, and I thought, wow, Ted Lasso got a 500,000 Twitter followers, and he's tweeting all the time. I'm like, is that Jason Sudeikis? Is it the producer? Who's doing those tweets? Because the tweets are great. And then I realized that, Kevin has a lot to say, and what a great way to market the book and all for Kevin to have a Twitter account. And what Kevin mostly does is he scouts kids, because as a dad, I'm out the ballpark all the time. And so if you'll notice, when I try to scout the kids, and it's interesting because Kevin now has thousands and thousands of followers, many of which are college coaches at the D1, D2, JUCO level, all over. And what I try to do is I focus on the kids' character, their personality, their work ethic.
That's it.
The other things, because the truth is, when everyone's trying to compete, 7% of high school kids who play high school ball get to college level. And I think it's fair to say that most kids at the college level, they all have the 90 exit velo. They all have the 60 below 7, right? So then what are the intangibles that makes this kid different? And what I realize is that, as a dad, as someone who thinks like a coach, and I'm sure you would agree this as a coach yourself, you spend your whole season with these kids in practice, at meals, on the bus, to and from games. Coaches want to like the kids they're coaching.
100,000%.
So when I see kids bat flipping and all that stuff, I know that, people love it. And even Perfect Game now, they're showing videos of their kids bat flipping, but I think it sends a very wrong message. And although there may be some coaches out there whose programs welcome that kind of behavior, there's a lot of coaches that do not like that kind of behavior. And so Kevin Dempsey wants to try to point out, the kid's got talent, but he's also a good person, right?
Oh, 100%.
And that gets into some of the intangibles that a sabermetrics chart will never show. Exit velo does not care if your kid's a good teammate or not, but those things really do matter. And so I try to, as when I channel my Dempsey guy, I try to focus on those things. And so, I'm always mentioning when a kid's terrific, and maybe he probably already has a high exit velo and he's got a strong arm, but I'm looking for those other things. And frankly, when I see a kid on the field who's a jerk, who's mean to others, there's no way Dempsey's going to ever promote that kid. And frankly, if Dempsey ever promoted a kid, and then I hear some terrible things, or learn firsthand something,
I love it.
I'll delete the tweet, because I want to promote. I know that coaches are listening to Dempsey, and I want Dempsey to have credibility. So I want to help kids. I want to help those coaches too. And I want kids to know that Dempsey's promoting you because you're a good person. It's not just about being a good player, because lots of kids are good players, but not everyone has character and integrity and honesty. And those are the things that I think are really the intangibles in life that long after kids are done playing baseball in the real world, those are the things that matter. And so, Kevin certainly preaches about things like conscious capitalism and meritocracy in his lectures, but he also cares about the other things. He wants his students to grow up to be fine citizens, and with that means integrity, character, honesty, and all those wonderful attributes. And so on the baseball field, off it, I think those things are really important.
So I want to try to concise my comments here because I am so enamored with what you just said. Yeah, I was a Division I softball coach, handing out scholarships and things like that. We'll talk about that in a second. I want to try to combine excursion, if you will. Just last year, head coach of a high school, very prestigious high school in California, their softball team. I was Division III offensive line coach. I played Division III football. I was the head of hockey operations for a junior hockey team that did very well out in California. And I bring this up real quick. I'm not going to use foul language, but everything you said is spot on. If you're an a-hole, you're not going to play. Let me explain to you. I've talked to many pro hockey players, many pro football players, many pro baseball players, many that even didn't make it to the show but played pro. And if you like Shorzy, I'm actually friends with and spoke to one of the gyms. Okay, so I bring this up this quick. If you are trash in a locker room, if you're disrespectful, if you're all about me, whether it's in the locker room, well, you might not even make the locker room, because here's the thing. If you're going to be the pump the chest guy, you better be Tom Brady. You better be something, because the rest of the team, you got to get along with each other, my friends. And if you don't, you're not going to play. You're not going to be on that team. I want to share something with you that I've shared on this podcast before. So it was a mid-October day, and I would have the tight ends once or twice a week come down with the offensive line during the football season. And we're doing some blocking. And I'm doing some typical rah-rah stuff, going, why are you guys here? Why are you guys here? Now, our tight end was so talented, but he was smaller. If he was bigger, he would definitely play D1. He owned D3. So I'm like, man, why are you here? Why are you here? You come all the way from Manhattan to go to Brooklyn every day to come here. And I expected him to say, I love football, this and that. You know what he said to me, Jonathan? Coach, I don't want to get shot again. What is it? Who are you going to root for, Jonathan? Who are you going to promote?
I get it.
Right? So I want to talk to you about, if I may, about being a sports dad. Because, like you mentioned, times have changed. And you have a son who is a high prospect. Walk me through the realities of being a helicopter parent, not being a helicopter parent, allowing them to be a child, understanding that you're dealing with somebody who's a little different. And they can't do some of the things. And do they play the one sport 12 months of the year, or do you let them play different sports? Walk me through that.
Yeah. Well, that's a broad topic. I could definitely speak to it in a couple different ways. I grew up on Long Island.
Me too.
Right on, go Long Island. And my dad had worked in the city. He was a tax attorney. And I remember throughout my entire life, even though my father was leaving for the station at 5:30 in the morning, he would work all day in the city. My dad never missed a soccer practice. He never missed a game. He even came to my practices, and he'd be the only dad there right from the station in a suit and tie. And I had the only dad at practice. In fact, in high school, side note, my mother, because of her work schedule, never came to my games. And in my senior year playing varsity soccer, the one game she came to, I got injured and carted off the field.
Oh.
And in the one game my father missed, I had a hat trick.
Right, of course. Right.
Soccer gods have a
soccer. I was just going to say the soccer gods.
Real.
Yes,
that's another book I'll write.
Yep.
So for me, I probably would have been anyway, just like my dad, and I would have been, not a helicopter parent, but a supportive dad who I want to be at every practice. I want to be at every game, and I have the opportunity. I'm an author. I'm also a financial advisor who works from home, so I had the flexibility to do that. So I don't think I'm a helicopter dad because I love watching my son do what he loves to do. And you know what? Now that he's a junior and he's only got a year and a half left of this stuff, I feel even more strongly that I want to watch him play because I enjoy it, and I think he enjoys watching me play. But as far as being a helicopter dad and giving him advice, it's very interesting. My son is self-motivated. I don't give him baseball tips. I never have, as far as the mechanics of the game. He's self-taught. He's always been. He goes onto YouTube. He will mimic watching a player, and he does all that. So when it comes to mechanics and different things, I avoid that. Every once in a while, I might say, look, I'll say to him, I'm just curious, what's your approach today at the plate? Are you swinging at the first pitch? Are you going to take the first pitch? I just want to get in his head. I want him to decide. It's his career. So I don't get involved in that stuff. However, where I do think parents play a role has to do with choosing the right program. Clubs have different personalities, and sometimes you might be in a club and it might be a very bad experience. And is it the right thing to let your kid suffer through that experience to learn something, or is that experience actually a toxic experience where he won't learn something? So that's where I think it's a little more tricky. But for me personally, I've heard the stories of abrasive, overbearing baseball parents. I actually know a story of a dad who would let his 14-year-old son drive home if he pitched really well without a license, and he also took the belt out if he had a really bad game. So to me, these kind of growing up in that kind of environment is unacceptable. I mean, who would want to play competitive sports with those kind of parents? So I've taken the approach. I'm always positive. I'm always supportive. And even when things don't work out, if you're on a big club, the rosters come out and your son doesn't get put on the roster that he thinks he deserves, even the one that you don't think he should be on a better, but what are you going to do, right? You're gonna go call and complain and whatever? No, I think you just let the baseball gods work that stuff out.
It'll work out.
And so I tend to have a laissez-faire approach when it comes to parenting in that sense, because I feel like, the baseball gods will take care of everything, and the kid can only control what he can control. And he has to learn that in life, life's not always fair. And just like you don't always get the job promotion, you might not make the roster. And so I want him to learn those experiences and have them, the highs and the lows. But I don't get involved in his mechanics. I do get involved when, for example, I remember seeing one time, my son, he would, I'm big. I've always been big on knickers, right? Old school pants. And so most kids now wear long pants. My son has always worn knickers since day one.
That's the way to go. Knickers are the only way to go. Long pants are meant for school.
And shout out to Coach Dudley at Blue Valley North High School in Overland Park, Kansas. All of his players must wear the knickers. However, my son wears the knickers, but one day I saw him and he pulled up his knickers above his knee. We saw a player on Mississippi State do that in the College Baseball World Series. And I kind of made a comment to him like, Nate, that looks a little unprofessional. But I didn't demand him stop doing it. Well, the next season in a game, he pulled him up to his thighs. That was when I was like, all right. So I didn't say anything during the game. After the game, I'm like, Nate, I didn't love the knickers above the knee. The thigh is just, I'm sorry. And then I found on Twitter, I forget the player on the White Sox who did that. And people were just, giving him all this crap. I'm like, Nate, it's okay to be different, but there's just certain levels of respect to the game of baseball you have to honor. And so I didn't, forbid him to do it. I just strongly suggested, remember, coaches are watching, scouts are always watching, and you want to represent yourself in a way that coach says, yeah, that kid, that's the kind of kid I want my team. And I said, Nate, how many coaches do you think want to see kids with their knickers to their thighs? I'm guessing it's zero, right? And thankfully, that was the last time he did it. But it's very tricky because you want them to have fun, you want them to enjoy the game, but you also want them to respect the game. And as a parent, believe me, my son has not, he's hit inside the park home runs. He's never hit one over the fence yet, but that's probably coming this year. But if I see my son bat flip, I'm going to have a sick feeling in my stomach because that's not how I raised him. And that's not the person that I wouldn't want him to want to become, right? So I think that as a parent, what I'm trying to do is instill the good morals, the proper ethics, the proper attitude, right? The positive attitude, the hard work attitude. But look, baseball, all sports, there's lots of highs and lows. And look, a kid, could go, have 3 strikeouts and they think that the world is ending. And the last thing a kid wants to hear after they went 0 for 3 was criticism from his father. So
exactly. Don't say, but do not say anything in the car, people.
Yeah.
Let the kid alone. They're a kid.
Your kid knows every mistake he made.
Yes.
He knows what he would have wanted to do different, right? So I try to leave that stuff alone. So you definitely have to be an advocate for your kid. You have to represent them. You have to do what you think is right for them. And so there have been times when we have made tough choices and we have switched programs and stuff like that. But I always remember, don't burn bridges. You never know when, as a parent, you might make a mistake and you might have made the wrong decision. You have to circle back and so I think being honest with your kids and recognizing that we're not perfect and we're just doing what we think is right for the kids. As far as playing many sports, I'm actually a big advocate of that. I respect the baseball players who play basketball and football, especially those football players, because they're doing the 2 days. They're up at 5:30 in the morning and they're hitting and they're that makes you tough. For my son, he was actually a really great soccer player, and I was his rec coach. In fact, I'll never forget this great story. We were at Game 7 of the 2014 World Series. The Royals had just lost to massive Bob Gardner, who had just had another amazing performance. And rather than being dejected and sad, like all the Royals fans were, we were 100 feet out of the ballpark, and they texted me, "Dad, I'm retiring from soccer." I'm thinking to myself, "You're 8 years old. What do you mean you're retiring?" He goes, "Dad, I want to become a baseball player full time." Now I thought at the time that seems ridiculous. You're so young, but my son's not the typical kid. And this is where my Baseball Guide series comes into play, because he has been obsessed with baseball from the very beginning. In fact, it started in Kansas City. So I guess at maybe 8 years old, my son was saving his birthday money, going on to eBay, buying wooden bats when no one plays with wood bats. It's all aluminum bats. And then he would go buy pine tar at Dick's Sporting Goods. And he would put pine tar on his wooden bats at 8, 9, and 10 years old.
Love it.
And I thought to myself, why are you doing this? Because you use aluminum bats. It's because the answer
piss
is
Billy Martin off.
He just loved, that's right, George Brett, pine tar. But my son just loved baseball that much. And so even though I thought it might not be in his best interest, because the truth is there's a lot of injury risk with repetition. And so when kids are doing the same thing over and over again, that's how you blow out elbows. It's how you blow out blow UCLs and all that stuff. And so personally, I would have liked him to see him play sports year round. But knowing my son and knowing how passionate he was, and then of course how he went about it. My son has a full-time professional trainer who coaches professional athletes, and so some days they're lifting weights, some days they're doing agility.
Been doing the right thing then.
He's doing the whole body, and so what he would have gotten from playing football or doing swimming or playing basketball or soccer, he's getting that properly because he's under the guise of a proper trainer. And so knowing that, it's fine. Also for him, he's so obsessed with the game of baseball that I respect that, right? And he's all in. And so he doesn't want to spend his free time playing Madden football or NHL hockey. He wants to play MLB The Show. Baseball, it's what he lives and breathes. And in many ways, look, my first book would have been The Soccer Gods Are Real if it wasn't for my son. When I was his coach, he was my best player. He would score 3 goals a game for me. And when he told me he was retiring from soccer, that's when I realized that my days of coaching soccer are done too, because I'm going to coach a team without my son on it. That seems kind of silly, right?
Right.
Go
ahead. I was going to say, I coached my daughter, and she was a very talented soccer player up through college, and then she decided she didn't want to play anymore. And I bring it up because at about 9 years old, a very wise person said to me, "You've taken her as far as you can. Let us take over." And you have to humble yourself and do that. Yeah, and that's so important.
Absolutely.
But you mentioned the soccer gods, and I laugh because, and I'm not name dropping here, I remember one time I was interviewing Alexa Lawless for my old podcast. And he said to me, because I mentioned that I grew up and I fell in love with soccer with the New York Cosmos, because they had Pele, Franz Beckenbauer, Errol Yassin, Giorgio Canaglia, Stevie Hunt. And he stopped me right there. He goes, "You'll never see that again." To put that many great players together. Tell me about, before we go, I have 2 or 3 fun questions for you, but it's been so much fun talking with you. Tell me about the Baseball Gods Are Real in this capacity, because people, they are. And I'll share a Rusty Staub comment with you in a minute that he once said. Tell me all about how that happened.
Well, first of all, Rusty Staub, probably the greatest pinch hitter of all time.
Without question.
My first team was the Mets. Well, the Baseball Gods is now a series. I've actually written the 4th one, the middle school years, which I'll put out when my son's in college. But they're different books, even though it's a series. In fact, the third book was so different than the first two that it launched my other tangential book series, The Football Gods Are Real, Hockey Gods Are Real.
Right.
My first book, The Baseball Gods Are Real, is really just my nonfiction, true life story, the first part of my life. Essentially, a midlife crisis got me into spirituality and got me into yoga. And essentially, I was an atheist my entire life until the age of 40. And they say there's no atheist in foxholes, right?
That's
so
right.
it wasn't until I had a midlife crisis. I was a very successful financial advisor at Morgan Stanley for 13 years. My wife grew up in Kansas, so we moved here. And then I lost half my clients over the next few years in the move. And then after moving here, I lost the other half. So I was no longer the New York broker. And then I started my own firm and I had a non-compete. And so I basically had to start that firm from scratch. And so the first book was basically how I had a midlife crisis and how I got out of it. And I noticed throughout that book that baseball stories inexplicably would weave through my life. And so the first book was really about the first part of my life and spirituality. The second book was basically how I befriended a man who was working behind the counter at Zoe's Kitchen. At the time, he was working three jobs. His name was John Perrin, and he and I hit it off. We became friends. It turned out that he was a professional baseball player. He was in the minor leagues with the Milwaukee Brewers, working three off-season jobs, and he became my apprentice. And then I hired him to work for me as a financial advisor. And during his last year with the Milwaukee Brewers, he was a licensed financial advisor at my firm. And my second book is about his travels through the minor leagues while working for me. And then my perspective as having him as my employee and my adventures that came through that. But during that second book, there were so many synchronicities. The first two books, so many miracles. For example, during a meditation, I got the idea there was going to be a Game 7 of the 2017 World Series. So I did a spiritual experiment. I thought, well, if the baseball gods are real, and I get a meditation thought that there's going to be a Game 7 after Game 2, I'm going to test the baseball gods. I'm going to buy 2 tickets in the bleachers for Game 7 today. My wife's like, that's crazy. That's ridiculous. They're $1,000 a piece. You can't do that much. Well, sweetie, if the series is over in Game 4, we get our money back from StubHub. Right. But if there's a Game 7, then we are going, and the baseball gods are real. And guess what? There was a Game 7, and Nate and I went. So
how beautiful is that?
Right. So it was amazing. It was an amazing experience. So after those first 2 books, I started to just deep dive into the baseball gods themselves. You know, what makes them? How do we know that they're real? Is it the rituals, the superstitions, the traditions, all these different things? And that's when I wrote volume 3. And that was really a nonfiction book paying homage to the baseball gods. There was very little about that book about me or my son. Just one story about my son where he kind of channeled Sandy Koufax after an anti-Semitic incident, and he threw us basically almost a no-hitter. And then and then a story about my friend John Perrin, because he had custom cleats that we had made for him. And as he was traveling through the baseball minor leagues, he would wear the cleats and he would pitch well. Right. He didn't wear the cleats, he would give up a home run. And I'd be like, Perrin, where are the cleats? Where are the cleats? And it's a whole story. He went 10 games in a row wearing the cleats and he gave up a run. And then I realized, wait a second, there's something here. And so that led to several years of researching all the esoteric spiritual aspects of baseball. When I finished that book, and it was my most successful book, it still is my most successful book. And then I realized, you know what? I could write about the baseball gods, the football gods, the hockey gods. It's the same thing. It's the same God, right? It's the father of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the father of Muhammad, Jesus Christ. And so what I've realized now is now I've written hockey. It's being edited, and football came out early this year. And then I had not played golf in 8 years until I developed arthritis in my wrist. And literally last week, we were in California for family vacation, and my son wanted to play golf. I said, you know what? Because I no longer need to throw batting practice to him and hit him fungals anymore because he's old enough and he's got coaches and players and friends. He doesn't need me. I could risk maybe playing and hurting my wrist again. Right. I said, well, if golf gods are real, my wrist won't hurt, and I'm going to play well. And if I play well, later this week, we're going to go to PGA West and play that course.
That's
and
right.
Sure enough,
oh, beautiful. Beautiful.
I got to the range. My first shot, I just crushed it. My next 5, I crushed it. I'm like, I'm ready. Go to the first hole, my first tee, right on the green. I looked at my son, and he's like, the golf gods are real. I'm writing that book. And so literally the last few days, I downloaded a PGA Golf Tour from my Xbox so I can start playing a little bit. And I started to
Nice.
research, and you would be amazed how the same things that are true about baseball and football and hockey are true with golf. And even in
Oh,
the
sure.
and you wouldn't believe this. As I was playing the video game a couple of nights ago, just to kind of get into the golf mode, I missed a bad shot, and the announcer said, "It's almost like the golf gods are torturing this guy." And I'm like, they just mentioned the golf gods in the video game. So obviously, all sports fans. And by the way, if you go on Twitter and for my Hockey Gods page, all I do for that one to promote it is I just do a search for Hockey Gods, and
Right.
you would not believe how many people every single day are tweeting about they pray to the Hockey Gods cursed us, the Hockey Gods blessed us, and the gifts and the memes and the videos that people
Oh,
post.
sure.
All I do is just give it a like and retweet it.
Yeah.
And then that person starts to follow me, and
There you go.
and it keeps going, because people really do get this stuff. And so in a way, I feel really cool that no one's doing what I'm doing, but anyone could have done it. The material was all there. I'm just the first person that said, you know what, I'm going to put this into a book, and took the initiative to go do it.
I think it's great. And I love it. And we got to talk again. I have one question before I go. I need to ask, and that is, if you had to pick two players as a child that had a lasting impression on you, who would they be?
Yeah, it's easy. Center fielder number 4, New York Mets, Lenny Dykstra.
Beautiful.
And then first base, New York Yankees, Don Mattingly, for sure.
Oh, you can't beat those two.
Big fan of Donnie baseball. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. But I grew up a Mets fan, morphed into a Yankees fan. So even guys like Dave Winfield, they still warm my heart.
Oh, absolutely.
Derek Jeter was another player who I always had loved, and then became my son's favorite player. And in fact, even when the Royals were in the World Series, in 14, my son was still a Yankees fan. It wasn't until Jeter retired that he officially was able to, let go of the Yankees, and now that he was in Kansas City, and officially become a Royals fan. So my son's answer would be Derek Jeter, but for me, it's Lenny Dykstra and Donnie baseball.
To me, my two, it's funny, it's also Met and a Yankee, because again, this whole, you can't root for one, which is just BS. Inspirational people are inspirational people. And I'm older than you, so mine are from the generation prior, and that is Tom Seaver, and Thurman Munson.
Oh, Thurman Munson, yeah.
I mean, that man played, I'm gonna cry now. That man played with pain, and you know what? Bring it.
Well, just to add up Thurman Munson, he died before his time in a terrible plane crash. And, when I think of who the baseball gods really are, I think of them as our ancestors, people who perished, who loved the game of baseball. And as angels now.
I just got chills. You're so right.
Yeah.
That is so right.
Rest in peace, Thurman Munson.
Amen to that. Jonathan Fink, thank you so much for being my guest today. And we will talk again. We'll talk privately. Thank you, my friend. This was excellent.
May the baseball gods always be with you. Thank you so much.
And listen, Republic of Baseball, the Republic Baseball League. Let's do it. Love it. Be well.
Take care.